My son brought his fiancée home, and she confronted me in the kitchen, pushing me against the counter. "Listen, old man, once we're married, you're going to be placed in the cheapest nursing home we can find. Daniel is tired of taking care of a useless burden like you." My son stood in the doorway, nodding in agreement. "It's true, Dad. We need your house more than you do." I simply smiled and continued cooking. Later, my phone revealed 23 missed calls and increasingly frantic texts, indicating that I was finally going to address this situation. I never thought I'd be sharing my family troubles on Reddit, but here I am at 2 a.m., still in shock and questioning if today's events were real. A bit of context. I'm 58 and have been a widower for 15 years since my wife, Eloise, passed away from cancer when our son Daniel was just 15. I've raised him on my own since then, giving him everything while receiving little in return. But I always told myself that's just part of being a parent. I've been the type to avoid conflict, the one who picks up the slack when others fail, the neighbor who never complains when a dog keeps messing on his lawn, the dad who co-signs loans, the friend who never gets repaid, the father who sacrificed dating and a social life for his son, the ultimate pushover. Daniel, now 30, brought his fiancée Savannah, 28, to stay with us last weekend. They have been together for 8 months and got engaged after 6, definitely a red flag, but I said nothing. I had only met her twice before. First at a noisy bar where we barely spoke, and then at Thanksgiving at my brother Henry's house, where she spent the whole time on TikTok. Nonetheless, I tried to be supportive because Daniel seemed happy. They arrived Friday evening, and I prepared the guest room, ordered pizza because they claimed to be too tired to go out, and Savannah made a face when I ordered from the local place instead of Domino's. Saturday morning, I made a big breakfast, but Daniel slept in until 11, and Savannah picked at her food, asking if I had any avocados, which I didn't. They spent the afternoon watching Netflix while I cleaned the house and prepared dinner. This is when everything changed. I was in the kitchen making Daniel's favorite lasagna when Savannah approached me while he was in the shower. I thought she might offer to help, but instead, she shoved me against the counter, getting in my face and said, "Listen, old man, once we're married, you're getting dumped in the cheapest nursing home we can find. Daniel is sick of taking care of a useless burden like you." I was so stunned that I couldn't respond, and then I noticed Daniel standing in the doorway. Instead of defending me, he simply nodded and said, "It's true, Dad. We need your house more than you do." My house, the one I've owned for 30 years, where I raised him, the home I paid off while working 2 jobs. I just smiled, nodded, and turned back to my sauce, adding some oregano as if nothing had happened. They returned to watching their show, and I continued cooking, serving dinner and making small talk about their wedding plans, which apparently involved a destination wedding in Mexico that I wasn't invited to. After they left to meet some of Daniel's old high school friends, I sat at my kitchen table and something shifted inside me. I decided I wasn't going to take this anymore. I grabbed my iPad, which Daniel often joked about being outdated, and started making calls, first to my brother Henry, who had warned me for years that Daniel was using me, then to an old friend from high school who works at a law firm, then to my bank, and finally to a neighbor who is a real estate agent. What Daniel and his gold-digging fiancée didn't realize is that my house is on land that has become quite valuable due to a new shopping center being built nearby. Developers had been leaving notes on my door, thinking I was just some clueless old man unaware of my assets. I had never been one for revenge, always believing that karma would take care of things. But something had changed in me that night. They returned home drunk around midnight, laughing and whispering about how they would sell my furniture once they got my house. I pretended to be asleep, but I was plotting. The next morning, I made them breakfast again, smiled, and told them how happy I was that they found each other. I hugged them goodbye and said, I looked forward to seeing them at the engagement party next month. They drove away, thinking everything was fine, completely unaware of what was coming. Now, it's 2:14 a.m., and I'm typing this from my brother's guest room. I have meetings with lawyers scheduled for tomorrow, and appointments with 3 different real estate agents the day after. I even have a locksmith coming to change my locks. For the first time in ages, I'm not second-guessing myself. I'm not worrying about being nice or putting everyone else first. It feels incredible. I'll update when there's more to share. But let's just say my son and his fiancée are about to learn a valuable lesson about respect and underestimating old men. P.S. Guess who's been covering Daniel's student loans all this time because he claimed he couldn't afford them? Guess who's about to stop those payments? And did I mention I'm still technically the guarantor on his apartment lease? Update 1. Hey again, Reddit. I'm completely overwhelmed by all the support on my last post. I never expected thousands of comments. Thanks for all the awards too. I'm still figuring out what those actually do. Haha. It's been just over a week since I discovered my son and his fiancée intended to place me in a nursing home and take my house. And what a week it's been. So, remember how I mentioned I was staying at my brother Henry's place? Well, I'm still here, and he's been fantastic through all of this. He's actually enjoying my company, saying his house has never been so clean, and the meals have never been better. Old habits die hard, I guess. I'm still taking care of everyone but myself, but that's not the important part. The crucial part is what I've been doing when I'm not stress cleaning my brother's house. Before Daniel was born, I worked at a law firm for nearly 10 years. It was nothing fancy, just helping with paperwork and research. But I learned a lot and kept in touch with people who owe me favors. For the first time in my life, I'm calling in those favors. My first call was to my old boss, Leonard, who retired years ago, but whose son now runs the firm. I explained my situation, and he got me an appointment the very next day. No waiting 2 weeks like normal folks would have to. I walked right in and it felt good. The lawyer reviewed all my documents, my house deed, my will, my finances, and then he smiled. He told me that Daniel had actually been in to see him 3 months prior, asking about elder care options and property transfers. My own son was looking for a lawyer behind my back. But since I had worked with his father, this lawyer fed Daniel a bunch of nonsense and then called me immediately after. I never received that message because Daniel set up my voicemail. And it turns out some messages just disappear. How convenient. That was just the start of many revelations I discovered while reviewing my bank statements, which I usually just skimmed online. I found several unauthorized transfers to Daniel's account over the past year. Small amounts. $200 here, $300 there. Nothing I would have noticed immediately. But it added up to over $7,000. And remember those student loans I mentioned? Turns out he graduated 3 years ago. And the money I thought I was sending to help him was actually funding his vacations. I found that out from his public Instagram, where he flaunted his trips to Cancun and Las Vegas, all paid for with my student loan money. Savannah is something else entirely. My niece Riley is great with social media and did some digging. It turns out Savannah has been married before, twice, to men over 50, with both marriages lasting less than 2 years, and ending with her acquiring their properties. She's like a black widow. But instead of killing her husbands, she just takes their houses. There's more. I found out they've been taking things from my house every time they visited. My late wife's jewelry, which I thought I'd misplaced. My coin collection. Even my dad's old watches, all gone, probably sold online. But enough about their misdeeds. Let's discuss what I've been doing about it. First, I met with a real estate agent. My house is worth way more than I thought, like 3 times what I expected. The new shopping center and surrounding developments have skyrocketed. Property values. But I'm not selling. Instead, I've transferred ownership to an irrevocable trust controlled by my brother. On paper, I no longer own my house. It belongs to the trust. I still have lifetime rights to live there. But if anything happens to me, it doesn't go to Daniel. It goes to my brother's kids, who, unlike my son, actually check in on me and remember my birthday. Next, I went to my bank and completely revamped my accounts. New account numbers, new online banking passwords, 2-factor authentication on everything. I removed Daniel as my emergency contact and beneficiary, replacing him with Henry. Then came the hardest part. I cancelled all automatic payments to Daniel, his student loans, his car insurance, and even his cell phone, which was somehow still on my family plan despite him being 30 years old. Oh, and I hired a private investigator, not anything fancy, just a guy Henry knows who used to do background checks. He dug deeper into Savannah's past and uncovered some interesting details about her being fired from her last job for financial irregularities, as she had access to the company credit card and used it for personal expenses. I also discovered that Daniel had been passed over for promotions 3 times due to character concerns. His boss caught him taking credit for others' work and manipulating his expense reports. Like father, like son, I suppose, though I would never engage in such behavior. Meanwhile, I've been completely calm in my communications with Daniel. When he asked why his phone was shut off, I played dumb, claiming it must be a billing error. When he inquired about the student loan payment, I said I was facing temporary financial difficulties, but would figure it out soon. They think I'm just a helpless old man who doesn't understand technology or finance. Yesterday, Daniel called and spent 45 minutes pretending to care about me, asking how I was doing, if I was eating well, and if I needed anything. The whole time, I could practically hear him sweating through the phone. He eventually got to the real reason for his call. He and Savannah were having cash flow issues and needed to borrow $3,000 for wedding deposits. I told him I'd have to dip into my savings, but I would find a way to help because that's what fathers do. He seemed relieved, thanked me profusely, and even said, "I love you, Dad," for the first time in years. I agreed to wire the money this morning, but instead, I sent a single dollar with the memo, "Here's all you deserve." That was 5 hours ago, and my phone has been blowing up ever since. First confusion, then concern, then outright panic. 23 missed calls and 47 text messages ranging from, "Did you make a mistake with the transfer?" to, "Are you trying to ruin my life?" I haven't responded to any of them yet. There's one more thing you should know. I invited them to dinner at my house tomorrow night, telling them I had big news and wanted to discuss my future. They think I'm going to announce I'm moving to a retirement community. But I've also invited some other people. My brother Henry and his wife, my niece and her husband, my neighbor who has known Daniel since he was a baby, and the real surprise guests, Savannah's parents. Turns out, Savannah told Daniel her parents were dead, but they're very much alive, living about 2 hours away and eager to hear about their daughter's engagement since she's apparently still legally married to her second husband. I've set up my dining room with my best dishes, cooked my famous pot roast, bought a nice bottle of whiskey to celebrate, and installed a small camera on the bookshelf to capture every moment. For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of confrontation. I'm looking forward to it. I've spent years being the nice guy, the pushover, the human ATM, and emotional punching bag. But tomorrow night, they're all going to meet the person I've become, the person who was always inside. Me but was too afraid to come out. The wolf they never saw coming. I'll update after dinner. Wish me luck, Reddit. But honestly, I don't think I'll need it. For once in my life, I'm holding all the cards, and I can't wait to play them. Final update. Well, Reddit. The dinner happened, and I'm still processing everything. Sorry for the delay in updating. I needed to let the dust settle a bit before I could write this out. Plus, my brother's Wi-Fi has been acting up. Typical Henry. Paying for the premium package but using a router from 2015. Where to begin? I spent all day preparing for this dinner, cleaning my house thoroughly, even though I hadn't stayed there all week. Old habits die hard. I made my famous pot roast with little potatoes and carrots that Daniel used to love as a kid, set the table with my best dishes, the ones that only come out for Christmas and Easter, and even put out fresh flowers and candles. If I was going to burn their world down, I wanted it to look nice. Henry and his wife Kate arrived first around 6, helping me finish setting up while I obsessively checked my phone. There were no new messages from Daniel. Since his last angry text about the car being repossessed, which honestly made me more anxious than the earlier barrage of texts. My niece Riley and her husband arrived next, followed by my neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, who brought her homemade apple pie and asked me 3 times if I was really sure about all this. I wasn't completely sure, but I nodded anyway. The real wildcards were Savannah's parents. I wasn't certain they would actually show up, but right at 6:45, they knocked on my door, Mr. and Mrs. Grant. They looked normal, even nice. Nothing like what I expected based on Savannah's tales of her abusive childhood and family trauma. Mrs. Grant hugged me immediately, thanking me for reaching out and showing me pictures of their other daughters and grandchild. They had been trying to contact Savannah for over a year since she ghosted them after borrowing $10,000 for what she claimed was a medical emergency. Then the doorbell rang again and my heart raced. I smoothed down my shirt, the new one I bought for this occasion, took a deep breath, and opened the door. There were Daniel and Savannah, looking confused and annoyed, freezing when they saw the cars in the driveway. Daniel asked what was happening, and I just smiled, welcoming them in and saying I had a surprise. Savannah immediately started making excuses about needing to leave, suddenly remembering a work emergency on a Saturday night. Sure. But Daniel, curious as ever, stepped inside and came face to face with Savannah's parents. I wish I could describe the look on her face. It was like watching someone's soul leave their body in real time. The color drained from her cheeks, and her mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. Mrs. Grant started crying, reaching out for her daughter, calling her Vanna, apparently her real name, not Savannah. She asked where she had been and why she had disappeared. Savannah looked like she might faint or run, but instead, she did what manipulators always do. She lashed out, screaming that her parents had no right to be there and that I had no right to contact them, claiming it was all a sick game. However, it's hard to play the victim when surrounded by evidence of your lies. I invited everyone to sit at the dining table, but Savannah refused. Daniel, looking more confused by the second, slowly took a seat. He glanced nervously at the pot roast, as if somehow this elaborate meal was the most threatening part of the evening. Then I laid it all out. The kitchen confrontation, the nursing home threats, the stealing, the lies about student loans, the taking of my wife's jewelry, the secret marriages, all of it. I didn't yell or cry. I just stated the facts calmly, like I was reading from a grocery list. With each revelation, Daniel seemed to shrink smaller in his chair. Mrs. Peterson gasped so loudly at one point that I thought she might need her inhaler. Henry kept his hand on my shoulder the whole time, as if afraid I might collapse if he let go. When I finished, the silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Even the ice maker in my fridge seemed afraid to make a sound. Daniel spoke first, starting with denial, insisting I misunderstood the kitchen conversation. Then he moved to excuses, claiming it was all Savannah's idea. Finally, he landed on anger, asking how dare I embarrass him in front of all these people. But Savannah lost it, calling me every name in the book. She claimed Daniel had warned her I was mentally unstable and accused me of fabricating everything because I was jealous of their happiness. She even threatened to sue me for defamation. That's when Mr. Grant quietly asked about her current husband, Steve. The room went silent again, and Daniel's head whipped towards Savannah so fast I thought he might get whiplash. Turns out, Savannah never divorced her second husband. She just moved on and started fresh with Daniel. Mr. Grant had the paperwork to prove it. I've never seen someone's face cycle through so many emotions in 30 seconds. Daniel went from confusion to disbelief to anger to complete despair, his whole body deflating as if someone unplugged him. Savannah tried to explain, but there's really no good explanation for being currently married while planning a wedding to someone else. She grabbed her purse, called us all horrible people, and stormed out, leaving Daniel alone at the table, surrounded by people who watched him grow up. What happened next surprised even me. Daniel began to cry, not just a few tears, but full-on sobbing, the kind I hadn't seen since he was 10 and fell out of the treehouse. He kept apologizing, saying he was sorry for messing up and that he didn't know what had happened to him. Part of me wanted to comfort him. That's what dads do, right? But the other part, the new part of me that had grown a spine, stayed seated, watching and waiting. His apologies turned to promises that he'd pay me back and be a better son. Then he started bargaining, asking if I could please help him, talk to his landlord, or help him get his car back. For the first time in my life I said no. No, I wouldn't bail him out. No, I wouldn't solve his problems. No, I wouldn't pretend this never happened. The dinner ended shortly after. Mrs. Peterson took Daniel home with her, as she always had a soft spot for him. Savannah's parents left to try to find their daughter. Henry and Kate helped me clean up in silence. That was 5 days ago. Since then, my phone has barely stopped buzzing. Daniel texts constantly, apologizing, begging, sometimes angry, sometimes desperate. Savannah apparently left town, returning to her second husband, according to her parents. Daniel lost his job. Turns out he was already on thin ice due to some accounting irregularities that I suspect involved Savannah. His landlord is evicting him for missed payments. His entire life is collapsing, and for the first time, I'm not rushing in to fix it. Instead, I'm fixing my life. I moved back into my house yesterday, changed all the locks, installed a security system, and spent a day just sitting in my garden, drinking coffee and planning what flowers to plant this spring. Henry thinks I should cut Daniel off completely, while Riley suggests giving him one more chance with strict boundaries. Mrs. Peterson calls daily, advocating for that poor boy who's just lost his way. I haven't decided yet what to do about Daniel. Part of me still loves him. He's my son after all. The little boy who used to fall asleep on my chest watching Saturday morning cartoons. But he's also the man who stood in my kitchen and agreed I should be discarded like trash. People keep asking if I feel better now, if revenge was sweet, if I'm happy with how things turned out. The truth is, I don't know. I don't feel happy exactly, but I don't feel like a doormat anymore either. I feel like myself, maybe for the first time in decades. Yesterday, I caught my reflection in the mirror and didn't immediately look away like I usually do. I actually stopped and looked at myself. Grey hair, wrinkles around my eyes, the same face I've always had, but somehow different. This morning, Daniel showed up on my doorstep, unshaven and wearing the same clothes as at dinner, with red eyes from crying or drinking, or both. He didn't ask for money this time. He just wanted to talk. I haven't let him in yet. He's sitting on the porch swing now while I type this, waiting. For once in my life, I'm making someone else wait for me. I'm not sure what I'll say when I finally open that door. I'm not sure what comes next for either of us. But I know one thing for certain. Whatever happens, I will never be anyone's doormat again.